Okay, today's topic is one that I have to admit is not one that's altogether interesting to me, and but it's nevertheless an important set of halachot, and for many of us, a practical set of halachot, and that is what are the things that we have to do in terms of dealing with animals on Shabbat, I think for us, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that the way that we in the city relate to animals is different than the way that they related to animals in the time of the Torah and the Gemara. For us, animals are more of a pet, a plaything, something to keep us, one of the things that I think is very new is, I think they call them now service pets. I don't know if you've seen this, like you get on an airplane, it used to be a service pet meant the guy was blind, he couldn't see, he needed someone to get somewhere. Now, I've found out since that in recent times that's not what a service pet means anymore. If you've noticed this at all, but I'm not making fun of it, although it's going to sound like it for a second. A person has anxiety or gets lonely, so that counts as a service pet, and they let the pet on the plane and give it all that other kind of status, which is okay. Listen, not what I grew up with or what I was used to. I'm not a big animal pet guy. I'm the type of guy that forbids animals in his house. Like that. That's my thing. But whatever. Okay. But my point is, forget me, right? Which I don't want to have anything to do with animals, but the animals in the time of the Gemara and the Torah and when the halacha is being formed played a very different role than what they play today. Animals today, again, are more for companionship, human support, and so on, as opposed to the time of the Gemara, where animals and the Torah, animals were like your phone, they were like your computer, they were like they like your car. They served much more of a professional working function than they tend to do for us today. Now, the truth is that's because we live in New York. Were we to live in Iowa, that not to say that the Iowans don't have service pets too, but they also there are using animals for different purposes. Although the truth is, I don't even know how much animals are used for work purposes anywhere anymore, given that machines kind of do what they do. Even if you're on a farm and you'll see an animal, the purpose of the animal on the farm, I would think, is less about working it than it is about using it for some kind of food or something of that nature. But again, I'm not an expert on any of that, but the point that I'm trying to make is that the role that animals play today is vastly different than the roles that animals played through the majority of the time that halacha is developed and built and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind, because some of what we're going to see is very different than maybe what we're used to thinking about animals, as you'll see. Ne'emar b'Torah, it says in the Torah, Sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha u'bayom hashvi'i tishbot. It says for 6 days you should do work, and on the 7th day you should rest. That we know. Leman yanuach shorecha b'chamorecha v'nafesh ben amatecha b'hager. But why? So that your ox and your donkey and your domestic workers can all rest too. This is a quote from the Aseret, not the Aseret Dibrot, but there's a similar statement in the Aseret Dibrot. But one of the ways the Torah frames Shabbat is not all about you, meaning you could say, I don't want to rest, I don't want to break, I don't want to stop working. And the Torah says, you think this is only about you? Shabbat is important not only because of you, but also because the people that you kind of what I'll call employ, the people that you put to work also need a break, and they may not tell you. They may not, either because they may not be able to, or because it may be challenging for them to say to you, their boss or their master or whatever it may be, I need a break. So that either they can't articulate it, won't articulate it, whatever it may be, and the Torah is saying, and you have to, and this is something along the lines, which for those of you that were part of the middle of the day class, we talked about yesterday about what are the Torah's concerns, right? The Torah's concerns are for our well-being, but the Torah is very, and we just came off of the holiday of Pesach, which expresses this. The Torah is also concerned about the well-being of those that are dependent upon us, our workers, our family members, and here we're seeing even our animals. And the Torah is very concerned for an Egyptian society. When I mean an Egyptian society, I mean the society of Egypt and the time of Shibud Mitzrayim, when Bnei Israel were there, where the very powerful few used whatever they had to make sure that the work was done by the very non-powerful many. I strongly encourage anyone to read Rabbi Sachs's Ceremony and Celebration. It's a great work on the holidays, and his piece on Pesach was really excellent. And the main thrust of what he was trying to say was that a big part of what Hashem and the Torah and the holiday of Pesach are all about is to be the anti-Egypt, to be the opposite of what Egypt was about. He says, if you look at the pyramids of Egypt, right, and you look at one of the larger pyramids, how many bricks are in the pyramid of Egypt? Take a guess. What do you think are how many stones? Now remember, some of these stones, many of these stones are a ton or more. How many stones? 10,000. Good. Let's hear some other guesses. IG, you're not muted. What do you guess?
I don't know. 100,000.
2.3 million.
Wow.
2.3 million.
Wow.
That's insane. He said, wow. And now, so think about what it takes to construct that, right? What it would take today to construct it. But now imagine there's no machinery, there's no cranes, there's no nothing, right? It was just people working and pushing and doing, right? They estimate that it would have taken people working nonstop 20 years, 10 hours a day. Wow. Thousands of people working, thousands, tens of thousands. And all that was so one guy or one small group of people could say, look how powerful I am. I'm building myself a legacy. And these were massive projects that the Egyptians conducted that on some level are still there. And the Egyptians were the Egyptians and they were the best at it, but you could go at other places in the ancient Near East and probably similarly in the Far East, right? Look at the Great Wall of China, right? We look at the Great Wall of China and we say, look how amazing that is. Yeah, how did that get there, right? What did it take? And maybe on some degree, and this is part of what Rabbi Sachs's point is, a lot of that still exists today in some way, shape, or form. There was, in the coronavirus, lots of different things have come out. China built a hospital that serviced I don't know how many people in 2 weeks. What does it take to build a hospital in 2 weeks? It wasn't all done by machine, right? It couldn't be, right? So what abuse of people is being done in those situations? So that's part of Rabbi Sachs's point of what the Jewish people are supposed to all be about, and what the holiday of Pesach is supposed to remind us about. And I say that, coming back to our point that we're trying to make here, which is Hashem's concern isn't only for us. A lot of times we look at the mitzvot and we say, what can the mitzvot do for me? A lot of the times, we'll say, it's not about you. You're at the top of the food chain. It may be about other people or beings. And here we're seeing that the Torah had as part of its plan for Shabbat, which we hold very dearly and we see great personal benefits for. It's not only about you. It's also about your animals. It's also so that your animals take a break, right? And you can imagine that if people have animals doing work for them that produce for them money and economy and what have you, they would be saying it's an animal. Just work it, and work it till it dies, and then get me another one. And the Torah is saying you can't do that. The animals are part of God's creations as well, and of course, in doing this, it links the workers together with the animals, because the truth is, in the time of the Torah and for a long time after, including in the United States of America 150, 180, 200 years ago, human beings were looked at as animals. If you had some version of slavery, which Americans had only 150, 170 years ago, then people looked at their workers as slaves and did not see any need for those workers or those animals to ever stop working, because that's what those things were there for, and work them till they die and then get others. And that was the thought. And the Torah is saying that's not what we believe. We believe that you have to give things a break. By the way, I'll add, even though we're talking about animals here, the Torah actually believes this not only about the animals, but about the earth itself. That the concept of Shemitah, which is very hard for us to grasp, or, and wrap our minds around, says, hey, the land itself needs to be let go and needs to be left alone for a year. And actually, we know scientifically this is true. You need to find times and ways to give even the earth, which is an inanimate object, a break. So we're not used to that. We're used to, especially New Yorkers, in the city that never sleep, that the email never shuts off, and there's never a time on the planet where you can't be productive and making things happen. The Torah feels very strongly against that concept, and that there needs to be breaks, and that's what Shabbat is all about. And what we're getting to is, and that applies to animals. And that's behind this whole area of halacha that we're going to get into, which, again, it's not going to seem so relevant to us in some ways, but if you understand the point that I'm making here, you know where the Torah is coming from, what it's trying to get to, and then we could talk about how we apply those laws, and we will. Okay, so the Torah is saying, give your animals a break, using specifically the work type animals, shor and chamor. Those are the heavy lifters, the ox and the donkey. So it says, it says, we see here that you also have to give a rest to the animals of Jewish people, meaning the animals you own. And not only a behema, which is kind of an ox, or a cow or something like that. It's true of any living creature. It says, therefore, you can't let your animal go. You can't even let it do this. You have to not have it happen, carrying any kind of burden. Again, one of the big things that these animals were used for was either to plow, work in the field, or push millstones or things like that, but also to carry heavy burdens from one place to another. You can't let your animal carry a heavy burden, or any burden, as we're going to see, from one place to another. But if the item that the animal is carrying is for its health or well-being, like a cast or a brace that helps it do, not work, but just be healthy, that would be allowed. Or something that is needed for its protection, like a leash, a collar, or something like that. That's considered like or a sweater or something to keep it warm. That's considered something that's there for the protection of the animal, and it's allowed. Only things that are for excessive protection are not allowed. Or something that's not the way that animal normally gets protected, then that would not be allowed. So again, the animal can't carry anything, right? So basically, I can't take this book and say, let me put it on the back of this ox, and the ox will carry that book somewhere. I can't do that because I'm working the animal. Obviously, when I say the book, so the normal way to do things is not to put a book on an animal, but maybe a case of books or whatever. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about size limits here. The idea is that the animal is off. The animal is keeping Shabbat to a certain degree, much like we would say about a human being. Obviously, not exactly in the same ways, but the idea that there's what's called shvitat behema. Shvitat behema means the keeping of Shabbat, the resting, the non-work of the animal is a mitzvah from the Torah, and it has a number of different avenues and ways that it's going to go. We're just beginning on this topic. And I'm going to try not to spend too much time on it because it's not so relevant to us, but I think philosophically, I think it shows us a very important part of what the Torah is trying to do, and that's why I've given the introduction that I have. Okay. Davar ha'alul lipol min ha'behema, גם אם הוא מיועד לשמירתה, אסור להניח לה לצאת בו למקום שאין בו עירוב, כזרע שמא ייפול ממנה, ובעל הבהמה ישכח ויסענה 4 אמות. He says, even if you have something it's allowed to carry, either it's a sweater for its warmth, or a leash in order to protect it, or something like that, a cast in order to protect it from, to have it heal, or something like that. If it's likely that that item will fall off when the animal is walking around in a public space, you can't let it do that either, because there's a rule that perhaps you're gonna go and pick it up, and then you'll carry it. And if there's no eruv in the area, then you'll be carrying. This only applies in a place where there's no eruv. So most of the places where we live today have an eruv, so this won't be as applicable, but you get the idea that if there's something that could potentially fall off the animal, there's another added issue, which is we're concerned that you will carry that item. And so therefore, it's another problem that's involved with working your animal. Another issue that arises is if an animal goes out and it has some kind of bell around its neck, and the purpose of the bell is so that it doesn't get lost. I recognize the sound of my animal's bell. He says you're not allowed to put that on the animal on Shabbat, or even to let the animal go out with it on Shabbat, because why? Potentially there's some issues with that animal creating sounds that are not allowed to be created on Shabbat. And also it will appear that you're sending that animal out in order to be sold. Again, not something that we really do, but we do have animals that have, for pets that have leashes, and a lot of times those leashes have certain sounds, and it's a good question as to whether or not that would be allowed or not on Shabbat. But you can see that it could definitely be a problem. Now, you're not allowed to rent out or loan out your animal that you own to a non-Jew on Shabbat, period, because what's the problem? The non-Jew may use it on Shabbat, and then your animal will have been working on Shabbat. So you could see these laws are very serious and very strict. Again, we don't really, they're not as applicable to us today. We don't use animals in the ways that we're talking about here, but nevertheless, the Torah is very serious about this concept, and the halacha is very serious about this concept of animals resting
Rabbi?
on Shabbat. Yes.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
So this is all based on the thinking that the animal needs to rest. We get that. Is there any aspects of this that we take away that are non-animal related, or is this really, really, really an animal thing?
Well, so I'll say yes and no. So you can transfer this to a couple of different areas, right? Like, for example, if I'm going to make a comparison from an animal to something else, so what is the something else? Am I going to compare to my workers? We have rules about the workers. Am I going to compare to my machinery, right? Which I think is what you were thinking about. So there's actually a whole section of rules about machinery, and machinery is different than animals. So the general rule is that animals are distinct from the machinery, and what you're not allowed to do with animals, you are allowed to do with machinery, right? So whereas I can't let my animal go out and do a certain thing, if I have a, shall we say, robot, I can let the animal go out and do that. I'm going to show you one other thing, and then I'll end with this, which is a very interesting exception to the rule, which at the time you would have to imagine didn't apply so much, but today actually is a very interesting piece, which is Behema shenivra'a al yedei sefer yetzira. I'm reading it in the Hebrew on purpose. An animal that was created through the Kabbalistic book, Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation. There's a book, maybe I shouldn't say this at 7:55, right before we're going to end the class, but there's a book in Kabbalah, which you can get, called Sefer Yetzirah, which basically says through mystical powers, you can create certain things like animals. What does that mean and how does that work? It's beyond the 3-minute conversation that we're going to have right now, but just know that that's something that's taken very seriously in the Gemara. There's actually discussions of rabbis who created their own animals in the Gemara using this mystical power, which may seem very foreign to us, but hold on. And al baalei tzivoy shel shvitat behemto, the owner doesn't have to relax that kind of animal. Since that animal wasn't created in the natural way, and the rules of the Torah don't apply to that animal. The Torah only applies to animals that were created in the normal, natural way, right? So who's creating animals using some letter combinations and mysticism? Well, you might have heard of Dolly the sheep, right? Right? What do I mean by Dolly the sheep, right? In the last 20 years, we have been able to genetically create animals, it seems, and I think it would be true, that a genetically created animal would not fall under the category of the mitzvot that we're talking about. And it's a very interesting area in halakha. I actually have spent some time studying this. It's been 15, 20 years, but there's a whole, I won't say a lot, but there's a good amount of question and thought that has to go into the concept of genetically created, genetically modified material and how it impacts us in halakha. And here you're seeing a very interesting small snippet of one, but there's a whole area of halakha about animals and how you have to deal with your animals, and then all of a sudden there's this thing that who would have thought, if you create an animal through a book, however that would have, through mysticism, which there's some accounts of in the Gemara, as I said, well then those laws don't apply. So the truth is, it becomes a big question for us of, hey, wait a second, once you did that, how does that apply for other things, right? Like, what does it apply for kashrut, right? Like, if I genetically create an animal, are the laws different for the genetically created animal? And then another question that is, I'm going to leave you with and blow your mind with, right, is, let's say I could genetically create a certain type of animal that now I want to be able to eat, right? Like, let's say I could genetically create a pig that chews its cud, right? It's got the split hooves, right? So it just doesn't have to chew its cud. What if we could genetically create not one pig, but a whole species of pig that could create, that could chew its cud, and that would chew its cud, which honestly, I bet we could do, right? So would that make the pig kosher? These are questions that actually some people have started to ask. It's a very interesting question. It's not for today, obviously, at 7:59, but just something that I think is pretty cool to see how halakha always continues to evolve, and there's always these threads that the Chachamim left there for us to work with. Anyway, it's 7:59. I'm going to pass the mic over. Joe, you look ready. Just wait 1 minute. I just have to get my tefillin on. I will.
Rabbi, do you know, did Rabbi Basul have the 7 o'clock?